Yes. Hello. It is such an honor to be in this space. My name is Evan Larson. My parents are sitting in the background. My mom, my dad. We are of Scandinavian and Italian and English, German, and a whole bunch of other things. That's my descendancy. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about some of the themes that we're going to talk about today night, and how the River Talk email that went out, it said using fire to heal the land. Sure. That's what you do. And so we're going to advance that. I think we're going to advance that. Oh, Zoom is telling me that I can't. Got it. I will not leave you. Okay. All right. We're going to change that a little bit. We're going to change that a little bit. Yeah. There we go. Good. Okay. Nimaawanji'idimin Giiwitaashkodeng is the name of the project. We'll talk more about that later. But rather than using fire, we're working with Ishkodeng fire. And that's a really important change in word, because it's about relationship. It's about collaboration. And that's really at the heart of this whole project. And so I know you're all excited to hear about fire and flames, but so much of this is really about relationship. And in that relationship idea, I was thinking about my background in Western science, and how science is this amazing tool that you can strike off into unknown and discover things and explore and do all of this great work. And that fits really beautifully with the central cultural myth of a lot of New America, which is, striking off as, an independent, on your own, carving your future out of this wild and empty land. And so you need to be able to discover, because there's nobody there to tell you. You have to find it on your own. And I started thinking, well, what if actually that is not true? What if that myth of striking out alone, what if it's never been true? And what if we've actually been surrounded by relationships and guides all this time? And part of the importance of this moment is stopping and realizing that, and learning how to ask, and learning how to understand things differently, maybe, or more completely, but from a different perspective. And so we're going to be talking about relationship, because that's what so much of this is about. But before we get to that, I'm going to put on, there we go. I'm going to put on my teacher hat. We're going to do some pedagogy. It's good to get the audience engaged. We don't have time to go through, where are you from? And tell me all about it. Like, it would be great, but we'd be here all night. So we're going to do what's called a think, pair, share. You're going to have 30 seconds after I stop talking. You're going to look at this, and you're going to figure out what that is. And then I'm going to say, okay, share. And you're going to turn to the person next to you, whether you know them or not. And you'll be like, I think it's this, and I think it's this. And then think you were in agreement, raise your hand. Okay, so ready to go. Think about it. Don't talk yet. Take it all first. Then just I want to make sure everybody, even the quiet introverts, have a chance to think. All right. Okay, good. Okay, now turn and share. Nice. If you're in a group, you can hang out, raise your hand. We're in a room. Do you know what the
I think it's a nice shape. Yes.
Say that again.
At some point in time, there was a glacier.
A glacier?
Continental, I can see it. Perfect. Yes, this is the last glacial max. So 21,000 years ago, there was a lot of ice right above where we are. Okay, and so also just to be clear, like this talk, we're going to make this artificial divide and pretend that Western science and Indigenous knowledge never taught already. And so this is science now, okay? Everybody put on your science hats. So last glacial maximum, we know this from geologic deposits and all sorts of fancy things that we can do to understand the past. And what's really cool is that you can actually reconstruct this now, and a lot of this is from lake data because glaciers make lakes. Right? Lakes are young on the landscape, glaciers make lakes, so you can see kind of when different lakes established, and you can estimate kind of how the ice moved and grew and shrank. And so there's a great group of researchers that then put together a bunch of stuff, and they make these super fancy animations. Now, you kids in the audience, you might think this is pretty lame, but this is awesome. Look at that. And 1,000-year steps from the last glacial maximum today. I love watching like Florida, like it's this, like it'll start over here in a second. But like, look at how big it is, and you can see the shorelines moving and stuff like that. So this is just to kind of start us out. Like everybody agrees there were glaciers, and that this land has changed a lot. And we can talk, if you don't agree with that, we can talk about it later because we're gonna have to come to some other common ground. But that's one of these things where like I feel like glaciers are pretty safe, especially if you live here. Okay, good. So the cool thing is that in those lake sediments that they use to age glaciers, you can also look at pollen. And you can see pollen is hilarious. But you can see the movement of trees and other plants and things over that same time. So as the ice sheets receded, you can see spruce actually was growing down in like Tennessee and Florida. Like you don't think of spruce forests down there. And the spruce is moving north and it was following the ice and kind of shifting. And it's cool. It's like it's kind of moving this way and then it races up into the Arctic and it kind of settles into where we think of spruce now. But it only got there the last couple thousand years. It's been moving on. It's kind of cool. Did anybody know that? Someone knew that. Okay. So then you can look at oak, kind of do the same thing. And what I think is really cool about oak is it's like down in Florida, it just hangs out. It's like, oh, I'm good. I'm gonna retire here. And then it kind of moves up into the Midwest, kind of hangs out around the Great Lakes, right? So there's oak, very different than spruce, right? Even though they started kind of in the same place. And then there's like, here's one, spruce, ash, and birch. The colors aren't important, but I just want you to like look at how they're changing and moving, and it's just almost chaotic in some ways. There's really beautiful poetry here, but like lots of change, right? And so now we're going to do one more of these, and I hope this doesn't make you nauseous, but here's 6 different species. And if you can find like commonality, like it's there, but everything's doing their own thing. And so that's really important for this talk here tonight and the work that we're doing. Because you're looking at these plants and they're moving across this land, and everywhere they're going, it's a different climate and a different setting and a different soil. And so they're constantly sorting out their relationships with each other through this whole time period. And so the first takeaway that I want you to leave with tonight here is the fact that when you look outside and you see a northern hardwood forest, it has never existed before in exactly the way it has now. Those relationships are deep. They're finding their own. Isn't it? To think about this beautiful confluence of moments. So that's important. Here's your next think pair share. I'm going to give you a little background. So this is another geologic record. And it is a reconstruction of the amount of fire in Earth systems over the history of the Earth. So if we're going with like 4.5 billion years or so for the Earth, it's funny, here's 1 billion. This is an exponential time scale. So over here, it's becoming more and more recent. And this red line is based off of geologic records. It's the best estimate of how much fire was in the Earth system. Okay. I'm going to draw an arrow right there. You'll note that before about 750 million years ago, there is no evidence of fire on Earth in the geologic record. We'll be very specific and certain with our scientific language. My question is, this is a little bit trickier, isn't it? So, why was there no fire before, or conversely, why did fires start to show up about 750 million years ago? Shh. Now it's your partner and figure out what that's fuel.
Right.
Emergence of plant life.
The emergence of plant life. So it literally, you had to get plants from the water onto the land. And then as soon as you did, it's good. Fire. So the take home point I want you to take from this one, as well as like, oh yeah, and then they also like kind of make notes like, oh, and everywhere that we saw people, we also saw more fire. Because that's also important. The take home point I want you to bring out of this one is that the forests that have never existed before that now exist have also never existed without fire. Also important, right? Okay. So now the third point, we're not even going to do the thing for here. Let's just cut this right to the glacial max. And if you're just going with the archaeology, there have been people here there since the last glacial maximum. So now put all of those pieces together. And so what that means is that as the trees and all the other associated beings moving north from the last glacial maximum, there was fire and there were people. So these forests have also never existed without people. I want you to think about that the next time you go to an untrammeled wilderness. Okay? All right, any questions? Okay. Okay. You didn't think there were people? Well, check. And so this is a wonderful resource if you're unfamiliar with it. It's a website. It's produced out of Canada. And this is a visualization of ancestral and contemporary lands, indigenous people of Turtle Island. And I just want you to think about this in the same context as all of those trees sorting things out, people sorting things out, and that this is the context for this work. We are talking about relationships. And so some of you who have seen talks about the boundary waters will have seen some of these slides, and it's funny, I keep wanting to talk about other stuff, but we've been in this for long enough where it's hard. And so we're going to start my beginning, like the reason that I'm here right now talking. We're talking about relationships, and I'm not going to acknowledge my parents again, or my wife and kids. Hi guys. So that guy back there in the baseball cap, wearing plaid. You can't see it under the that's Lane. And Lane Johnson works at the Cloquet Forestry Center, and then that's Dr. Kirk Kipfmuller, faculty at the University of Minnesota, down in the Twin Cities. And my relationship with these two folks is very much one. And so Lane had a great idea about going to the boundary waters, building off of those experiences as an archaeology intern, to use tree rings to look at the history of fire and kind of critique this whole notion of wilderness as it plays out of the boundary waters. And so this was our first trip, 2011, Lac La Croix. It was a great day, great trip, pretty transformative as I reflect on this day, right? That's why it was so easy to go. I've spent a lot of time up there with Lane, and I like this photo because it's him contemplating if we can jump over the thunderstorm if we paddle hard enough, or if we can get ahead of it. Not really, but we spent a lot of time up here thinking about fire, and in that process, we've met a lot of just incredible people. And it's also weird to talk when this room is full of people who can tell a richer story of the same thing. So there's so many people here. It's really hard. And so this is Kurt pondering the meaning of wilderness as an area of earth where life, community of life are untrammeled by man, or man himself is a visitor who does not remain. And that's kind of the premise. It's an important part of the 1964 Wilderness Act. It informs so much of how so many of us think about the land, even if we don't recognize it. And it's a really important question because it guides what we do. And so, thinking about the boundary waters, you look at contemporary reservations and reserves. Certainly, this has not been an unpeopled landscape, and so it's a great place to go. Even if you disregard the long oral history and cultural heritage of these communities that have engaged with the land through fire. This blueberry camp that's in northern Wisconsin and northern Minnesota, early 1900s. And it's one of these things where I often get really uncomfortable talking about like, well, we had to go and look at the data to find out if this oral history of using fire to manage blueberries is true or not. Sure. Yeah, so thinking about this in the context of this, the boundary waters, favorite campsites under red pine. So to set this up as if it was science, which it is, we work with hypotheses, right? And so this is a great paper about how, if you want to determine if people really influence historical fire regimes, how do you do it? Well, first, you have to figure out if there are changes in fire activity, either temporally, so over time, or over space. Then you need to look and see if those changes cannot be explained by climate or fuels. And then if you still haven't proven these relationships, then you can look and see if those changes in fire activity coincide with human history. So setting these up is kind of like your 3 questions that guide your research. And so we went off into the boundary waters, and this will be a review for some of you. We looked for fire-scarred red pine trees. Usually if you have a favorite campsite, that's going to be where they are. And you can look up and in these trees and you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 fire scars, like these repeated layers of callus tissue that heal over injury from fire that scarred the tree but didn't kill it. So not a hot fire, not the Bambi fire, right? And then since it's wilderness, we're only working with dead and down. We would go to pine trees, we cut them with hand tools, take this and polish it up. You apply this process of cross dating, which students are going to explain in fine detail. And then you can figure out when this tree was living and when it died. And, should I say the joke, Eamon? Yeah, so this tree, this red pine, grew from 1679 to 1989 and recorded fires in 1702, 1718. 1743, 1758, 1770, 1780, 1795, 1823, 1842, then 1850, at which point lightning stopped striking the small island in the middle of Lake Saginaw. And it's kind of funny, but it's also really sad. Oh, but lightning might have signed the treaty.
Right.
It was like, I promise I won't light the forest on fire anymore, so that you can turn it into comic books. Lightning could not, it tried and then affirmed the treaty. Yeah, so we did that all over, and we found trees that look like this, which students are also going to talk about a little bit more, say culturally modified pine tree. I'll let them tell you why, but you can see tool marks and kind of the same process. You can see resin coming around the edge of the injury, and that was really important for various reasons. You can see where people came and harvested the resin. It's pretty awesome to stand by these trees and recognize this history, because if you find a dead one, and it's the same with fire scars, where you can sand it up and then you can cross date it and then learn that that tree was peeled in the year 1800. And then you start layering this on. We looked at the forest structure and demographics, looked at changing ages of the trees, we collected core samples, figure out how old things were. And then this is the data set from the boundary waters. And we've done a lot more, but this is a really important part for me because it's what led me to connect with Melonee and Damon and a lot of other folks here. And so this is where we worked along the border route. So a lot of the big lakes, that's where we found most of the fires. We looked at every lake with blue there. And the red dots show you where we found fires. So there's some spatial differences, that's important. The yellow dots are the culturally modified trees. The yellow or the red circles are age structure plots. So we went all over the place, 200 lakes, whole bunch of fire scarred trees and culturally modified trees. We recorded trees in 32 different plots and got ages from almost 1,100 trees. So really a big data set. So let's lay out our hypothesis as a scientist. Is there a change in frequency? Well, every white line is a tree ring sample. Every red dot is a fire scar that was recorded by that tree. So no fire. I see a change in frequency. We could use statistics to show this, but I'm just going to go with the visual interpretation. Okay. Okay, good, check. We see a change in frequency. Let's look at the fire climate relationship. This is the result of what's called a superposed epoch analysis. What it tells you is that during a year that a big fire burns across a lot of places, it's pretty dry. That makes sense, right? And then you can look at this a whole bunch of different ways, and it gets a lot more complicated. I'll give you a great paper. It's only 52 pages long, and we dive into this graph because it's really important. So here's a reconstruction of drought activity. So this is drought up in northern Minnesota. And then red dots are everywhere that we have fires, and the bigger circles are the bigger fires. So the really biggest fires happen during droughts. But we had fires in all different climate conditions. And then what I want to point out here is that drought is still doing what drought has always done. So can you explain the lack of fire activity because of a changing climate? Nope. What if it was people? Wait a second. Remember this history? There were people there. So let's now stack it up. So the top graph is sites that were off of the border route, so where people traveled less frequently based off of historical records and oral history. And then these samples were taken along the border route. And so you can see right away, so like just looking off route, on route, boy, there's a lot more fires where there are. And then we can add on, this is the total number of fire events over time. And then we can add the scars from the culturally modified trees. Well, those line up pretty well. And then we'll put a count of the cultural modifications down there. And then we'll look at European written record about, the first recorded Anishinaabeg settlement on Crane Lake on the west side of our study area, as lands contested with Lakota. We're kind of like coming into different relation. And then we can throw the Nelson Act, which followed the Dawes Act and required all log reservation in Ojibwe and Minnesota to remove themselves to the White Earth Reservation. Not that they did. Does this line up with culture? Seems pretty compelling to me. We could even use statistics to show that this is real. So, why did the fire stop? Treaties like this. This is a good one. Lane found this digging through some old photographs. 1908, $5,000 fine for setting a fire. Oh. I mean, I don't know about you, that's a hard fine today. That's like 100 years ago. And 2 years in prison also means your family dies. So, there's that. And so you look at this, and then you think, well, what did the forest do, this pristine, untouched forest? And this is the age structure from those 1,000 trees that we poured. And you can see when the fire stops, trees started establishing in mass. And if you look at what this looks like, I don't know how many of you pay attention to like how California burns over here. Yeah, I've heard this. You smell the smoke. Yeah, and you know why, right? Because there's not been fires, so the trees grow up and get really thick, so then the fires get really big. Like ladder fuels, and then also like, wait, is this in California or is this in the boundary waters? Well, it's in the boundary waters. And if you paddle some of these recent burns, like laying out pocket, it's pretty homogeneous. So you've got a change in fire behavior because of that 100 years without fire. In addition to that, if you look at the trees that are coming in, this pristine untouched wilderness, they're not red pine. And what's really interesting for Minnesotans, this should be important because it's a state tree. We surveyed 5,537 square meters of the best pine habitat in the boundary waters. And does anybody want to take a guess on how many red pine seedlings we found? It was more than 0. More than 0.
36.
8. 8. So, did we protect the red pine by protecting it as wilderness? So, this is now this is my own kind of personal transformation, thinking about these as not pristine wilderness systems. These are socio-ecological systems. These pine forests exist because of people, not in spite of them. And so then you can't do this and not have your life and your whole universe change. Because I was on sabbatical when I was doing a lot of this work. So it was one sabbatical cycle ago. And I was staying at my family's cabin up on Crooked Lake near Brainerd. It's super beautiful, maple canopy. I've got lots of stories about this is our morning commute to the school bus. Kids could go uphill both ways to get to the school bus for an hour and a half. It was great. They lived the life. Didn't you, kids? Okay. And so what was really interesting is if you look at where we are on the lake, we don't have the best spot, that's out on point, but we're kind of up on the hill overlooking the south facing bay. The Narrows is where all the ice houses are, it's the best fishing over winter. That bay opens up early, go swimming next to the ice and see like all the fish coming in, it's amazing. And then you look at like this map from 1843 by Nicolay, and you go up and like, so there's Mille Lacs, Mississippi, all these dashed lines are the trails that connected places, and that's kind of where our lake goes. And then you might read, say, Maud Kegg's book, and she talks about how they were walking the ridge near there, and he killed a duck with the rock, and they were living on this land. And then as we were walking through the woods to get the girls to the school bus, and I was contemplating the fact, like, oh, we do have red pine over this dense maple forest. And all of a sudden I realized, like, oh, and the neighbor's red pine's fire scarred. Oh, and out on the point underneath this pine that laid out into the Narrows that I fished under my whole life. Finally got on it, finally walked up that tree, look at the base. And the 10 fire scars on this. Spitting distance, and there's blueberries and poisoning. So now that I know what's happening in the boundary wars, I also recognize that in the years 1804, 1825, 1835, 45, 60, 65, 75, 90, and 1898, where I've grown up my whole life, it's the same story. So we're living in that legacy. So I'm processing this, and I get an invitation to speak at the Sigurd Olson Institute at Northland College, which we won't dive totally into the irony of this, but it's beautiful. So I was like, yeah, that's awesome. And so go up and I give this talk, and I'm looking, there's this Anishinaabeg guy up in front going this whole time. And there's this yeah, oh crap. And then there's everyone standing there, and she's like watching intently. And so after the talk is done, I'm like, all right, let's go get it. So we go down and we meet. And then Melanie's going to tell her story. This isn't over yet. We're still going to come back.
So a 5-minute break, just kidding. So this is where we transition. So Evan didn't touch on it too much earlier, but our story is complicated. And so I'll start by introducing myself. Melonee, Montano, Indigo. So I'm from the Red Cliff Reservation, grew up there all my life except for just a couple of years. And my kids aren't on Zoom, they're actually in the back of the room, so I like to really raise hell with them. But yeah, so how I came into fire is a whole roundabout way. So I'll start, Evan started with the time of the glaciers, and I'm so happy that somebody in the room brought that up. And of course, we're harassing and saying glaciers. It's because as Anishinaabe people, we're so used to hearing our true stories doubted. And we're trying to tell the accurate history, and science is like, no, that doesn't make any sense until like 80 years down the line, 200 years down the line, things like that. So for us, my connection to fire, when, you know, for a while I was like, well, I got kind of connected to it when I was young and going around hanging with elders, and they would talk about fire on a reservation and talk about lack of blueberries, all their memories and things like that. And I thought, yeah, it was back then when I came, you know, connected to it and kind of had an interest, but not really a big one. But then last night I was thinking about it and like, no, this is in our blood as Anishinaabe people. Like, I was born into this because my ancestors were doing this. And Val talked a little bit about this too, but like our people were on these lands burning, and I don't care if science like hasn't caught up to it yet. That's our accurate history. That's our story. So I realized like my connection came to it before I was born. It's been with my ancestors, you know, it's been with the people on these lands. It was with us as we moved to the east. And all of a sudden, the pines were in that same region. And it was just really strange. It doesn't make any sense, like glaciers. Who would have thought such things? So basically, I hung out with a lot of elders growing up, as I said, and just visiting with them, but I would also carry a little tape recorder around at times, and they would talk about old times, talk about things way before I was born, talk about stories from their grandparents going out on the islands and burning. And I kept asking, like, why is this not happening anymore? And they said, we can't, we don't even talk about those kind of things. And so eventually what they talked about was the fear of, burning. And I said, but why? If you did it all your life, why would you have a fear? Well, $5,000 fine back during that time. You think about Rob, I don't know where he's sitting, but he would like this one. So back in the 1980s, my mom actually gave me these old documents the other day of some research she had done connected to fire, which I had no idea she even did any of this. So back in the 1980s, in these documents, there was a random little fact in there that our chief law enforcement officer at that time in the 1980s, his wage was $3.95. I'm like, I was already born after then, like $3.95. You take it back to the early 1900s and think about a $5,000 fine and having to sit in jail for 30 days if you get caught burning. But burning is part of our culture. Burning is part of our ceremonies. Burning is part of our identity. Burning is like why we have our plants, our medicines, our tobacco that we use with the plants that are actually fire dependent. And our tobacco is what's part of our identity, and we can't live and survive and do the ceremonies unless we have that tobacco. So I'm like, oh my gosh, it's all super deep. So our ancestors and just our grandmas, our grandpas, they were being thrown in jail in the early 1900s, given $5,000 fines. And I can't repeat it enough because it's like, why? Why would this happen? Logging, assimilation, taking the culture away from us, all those different things. Of course, the obvious efforts that nobody likes to talk about, the accurate history. But the thing is, during then, of course, a lot of times there was 14 kids. And I think there's probably people in the room that came from families like that. My own dad did. And I asked, how did you feed everybody? And of course, they were hunting, they were fishing, they were gathering. Well, when they couldn't, it was illegal. They had to do it in the middle of the night. They had to do it in secret. Same with the ceremonies. And they couldn't risk using fire, getting thrown in jail for $5,000. And all of a sudden, their 14 kids and their wife are at home starving for 30 days in the cold. So what kind of choice are you going to make? So eventually, I met Damon. We had our kids. And he took on a strong interest to fire. And before I met him, he was doing some fire stuff in his youth and everything, basically exposed to it. And he started doing wildland fire and hitting it heavy and being out there a lot while he was at home with the kids. And he was doing his other work with the Apostle Islands. How ironic, a government agency that is telling us don't do anything to the land because it was pristine and like this. And nobody's made it this way except for this magical thing. So he's working for them and going out and doing these fires. And him and I are trying to tell them, like, this land is not like this because it was natural. This land is like this because we have a reciprocal relationship with it. Us as Anishinaabe people, we've been here. We've been burning on these islands. So one thing that ended up happening was, long story short, whole nother story, as our story is complicated. We eventually were able to bring fire back to Stockton Island, part of the Apostle Islands, which was like crazy unheard of for us. Our area tribes have a memorandum of understanding with Apostle Islands to basically be able to go out and gather a handful of berries, a couple boughs, do a few things like that. But we brought our son out there and put him out on a fast, and we did it because we said we were doing it. And the park was like, you can't do these kind of things. We have visitors. Like, what if they get scared? And all these bizarre things. And so we pushed against that. And we decided to we're doing our ceremonies. We're taking our lands back. And we're going to bring fire back. And we're going to start bringing our foods back, our medicines and all those things. And we did. We were successful with it. And now it's still moving forward. And so in the meantime, I'm going to jump back a little bit before that. While I was hanging out with those elders, we had an elder from Lac-La-Croix come to our community. And I'll save a lot of the details to speed up time, but basically he came and was doing some ceremonies and things and had a series of dreams. And he had met me and said, you need to come to my community. And I was young at the time and literally a punk, like skating and all those kind of things. Like, why do I want to go hang out in Lac-La-Croix, this little tiny reserve that you can only fly into, and what am I going to do there? And he said he was going to bring me to start learning the plants, the medicines, the ceremonies, all the things that we were already doing at home, but a lot deeper because they were able to still hold on to that stuff a lot more, whereas us, we couldn't. we were hit by assimilation super hard and up in Red Cliff and the whole area. So eventually I started going up there, and his family became my family and ours became theirs. So that was around Giiwitaashkodeng fun. So I spent a lot of time with him up in Lacroix and just being on the land and learning a lot about that area and being extremely connected to it, and ways that I can't even explain, like on a spiritual level, like we're talking little people and stuff like that. And that's our accurate history. So I spent time up there, as I said, over and over, but we eventually talked about doing cultural exchanges and all these type of things. We had a lot of work ahead of us, and unfortunately he had passed away, and it was unexpectedly, and he was in Thunder Bay at the time, and it was like my first real like hard death that I had ever experienced. So I basically like shut down. I'm like, I'm not doing ceremonies, I'm not being Indian anymore and all those kind of things. But I sort of pushed along a little bit, and it became hard when, you know, I had that and I was trying to grieve, and then Damon's doing fire, and I'm thinking fire is like causing me pain because he's not home, and culture is causing me pain because Ron died and whatever. And I was trying to like process this stuff and trying to be positive and think, well, it's part of our people. Like, why did they suffer then? And now I'm suffering. Really, I shouldn't even, you know, feel that bad for myself. And I just kind of hung on to it for a while. And then eventually Damon's like, hey, let's go to this presentation at the Sigurd Olson and check this out. This guy's talking about fire. Like, well, who is he? And he tells me, I'm like, yeah, he sounds like. So we had to fight about it.
Larson?
Yeah, Evan Larson, like, I don't know. I guess we'll check it out. So we went, and there he is. And I'm like, yeah, this is kind of interesting. He's got some cool stuff. Some of it I'm not quite understanding. It's a little bit beyond me, but it's getting interesting. And eventually he starts showing these slides, like these pictures as he's talking, but talking about other stuff, whatever. And I'm like, that's familiar. I know those places. And it started hitting me like, oh, that's Lacroix. And I hadn't been back there since Ron had passed away. And so that was in my early 20s. And so that was like mid 90s. And this, I can't remember when the talk was, but about 10 years ago, somewhere around there. So I was like, this is the first time I've really like started opening up and realizing I have to start picking Lacroix back up again. So I thought, I got to talk to this guy because of that. But also I got to tell him a thing or two because there's things that are a little bit off and stuff. But at the same time, as Evan was standing up there, it was like, I talked about it like there was something in him morphing. He was this strong scientist and telling all these cool things, and he was having this major aha moment about the Wilderness Act, and he's like, yeah, and there were people on the land that had this connection and everything's reciprocal. We're like, yeah, that's our history. But he was waking up to it, and Damon and I were watching him wake up, and Evan was getting emotional, and we're like, whoa, he's coming around. We need to connect with him. So we talked a little bit, kind of met, and that was about it. And then not too long ago, I was up in Mille Lacs at some ceremonies, and Damon said, remember that guy, Evan Larson? And in the meantime, I had met Robin Kimmer. She became a friend of mine, and we're hanging out, doing our thing off and on, whatever. So he's like, well, Robin Kimmer is supposed to go with him too, and she can't go. And so do you want to go? And I can't go back to Lacroix. And eventually I decided, all right, I'll go in. So I contacted Evan, and Evan's like, yeah, so we went and met at that talk I did. And he said, and so there's another friend of mine, Lane Johnson, and you want to go with us? So I jumped in a truck with these two, Lane and Evan, and went up to Lacroix. Now we can actually drive in rather just on a bush plane. And we had a journey going up there. And when we were there, it was like this wild connection where we realized it wasn't just about Lacroix or us three, or the Sigurd Olson, or the Wilderness Act, or even just Anishinaabeg, but it was about all these reciprocal relationships and waking up and realizing that it's time to start doing this work, and it's time for people to start listening, telling your accurate history. And other people that are partners on the project and eventually came on board, and everybody told us, yep, this is good work. It's time to wake up and time to start doing it. And so with that, I got coerced into doing some crazy thing called a grad degree. And so I ended up tying that in to now my research, because I'm also currently working for Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission as their traditional ecological knowledge outreach specialist with the climate change program. Now we're trying to tie it all in together, and we have multiple groups of different people doing firework all in this region, still connecting and whatever. So we'll talk a little bit about that at the end, because we'll basically have them stand up so you know, like, kind of who's doing what in the region. There's a lot of fire efforts happening. And for myself, my biggest goal, one, is to see fire come back here. And for me, like, that's going to be our healing. That's going to be bringing back our identity and getting us back on the land. And we'll talk about it at the end on, like, what you can do to help and what does this mean? So what? Like, so what if there's fire or not? But also the thing for me is just to, like, it's not even for me, it's to start picking up my responsibilities that I was told I have many years ago, which is like, start doing the heavy work for our people. Everybody, all the Anishinaabe that were placed on this earth, they were given responsibilities, they have gifts. And we tend to, like, you know, out of historical trauma and all these other things, we tend to get pushed away, or we walk away because it's too hard to walk these paths and walk this path of scientific world and indigenous knowledge and non-native and native, and like, how do you do all of this? So for me, I just decided through this work, through the research, through everything, I have to do this work that's connected to fire for all sorts of different reasons. And a lot of it has to do with things waking up and our accurate history being told. So that would pass on to the students.
So we craft this proposal. We have a common friend in Robin, who's also a co-PI on this project, and we drafted this proposal. Rumor has it that it was well received. And what we're basically doing is taking this story in all of these different ways that it's been told and understood, and at the same time, all of these hearing records coming in, and can I come and invite people to fill in the chairs if they would like to?
There's some open chairs. Feel free to come and.
Yeah, please come in. There's some.
Side chairs over there.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah.
Thanks, sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. So looking everywhere, there's been fire. Everywhere we go, with pines, there's fire and fire and fire and fire. And so this notion of coming to the head of the lake, which, thinking about the migration story from the Atlantic along the Great Lakes, all the stopping places, you look at the head of Lake Superior, like, we're here, right? Depends on what map you prefer. Spirit Island, just over there. And right over here, the sandbar with red pine. Pine Forest State Natural Area, Science and Natural Area. Does this story play out here? And this is one of the sweet parts. So we get this grant, like, yay! We have money for undergraduate students. We're like, we write this ad, put a lot of thought into it, we blast it out, and it probably hits, I don't know, $1,000.
Yeah.
All over the region.
Many others.
Yeah. And we get these 4 applications that stand out.
And how many others? Maybe 2 more showed interest, but no.
It's these. And so after we check their references, and I asked you to please evaluate these individuals. And I heard them 4, and this is not the first time that they've worked together. And that has been an incredible strength of this project. And so I'm going to turn the floor over to the students who are going to share the story of this place with you now. So you got it.
you want to be? Or is this okay?
Yes. Okay.
Is it okay for the Zoom?
Zoom?
All right. Hi, guys. Thank you for being here. Oh,
This is where the.
oh, thank you, guys. Ishkagizis Indigenous, Nagachuanang Ndunjaba, Makwan Nduran. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Ishkagizis Indigenous, Nagachuanang Ndunjaba, Makwan Nduram. So hi, my name is Ishkagizis in Ojibwe, or it's Emily in English, a little bit easier to remember. I am Bear Clan and I'm from Fond du Lac.
Bonjour, King Indigenous cause. Maklandudem, Nagatunang Dunjaba. My name is Ashla. I am an environmental science major at Fond du Lac Tribal College, and I am from here.
Buju, Malka Reynolds and Indigenous, Nagachi Wanang Nindu Dam. Nagachi Wanang Nindu Jabab, Nagazin Nindu Dam. My name is Malka Reynolds. I'm from Fond du Lac. I go to Fond du Lac Tribal and Community College, and I use she, her pronouns.
I'm a KBA name, with my so, my name in English is Valerie. My actual last name is my Anishinaabeg name. My clan is Thunderbird and I live in Poland Springs. I am environmental science major and I go to on the. Could you hear me? All right. Oh, I guess I keep going. Hey, should I keep going? No.
Keep going, keep it
A
moving.
little bit about why it's important to us.
Yeah, go ahead. Let's start that.
Yeah, so for me, when I got this email, I thought that sounds like a really great project. I thought it was really timely because there was a fire actually pretty recently on Wisconsin Point. And I thought, hey, it's culture, it's something recent. And I kind of like to go for any kind of science in the area because there's no better place for science right now than northern Minnesota.
For me, it's the opportunity to work in this area that I love. I grew up here, you know, this is it's kind of my happy place. I go to the beach, I go to that water and I reconnect. I need, like, I go there when I need to center myself. To be a part of this project was like a dream. As soon as I got the okay that I was in, I called my dad, first one, and I cried because of how important I think this is for us to tell the story.
So immediately what stood out to me when I saw the email was how this cultural work was going on in Minnesota and Wisconsin. In Minnesota and Wisconsin Point have always been important to me because they're very connected to Anishinaabe culture, specifically out in Fond du Lac Band. And I'm an Anishinaabe myself. I'm from Fond du Lac. And being able to do this cultural work at a place that's so important to my people, I couldn't pass it up. I had to do this.
For me, it was like a lot of the same things. We had all gotten an email and I know like we were all CC'd on it. And I'm like, hey, I know these people, like we've already done projects together. And it came from our GIS instructor and it was like, it was the first line I remember when I opened it up was on the show. And I was like, how many research opportunities come out? And the first sentence, the title is in my language. So like that was for me was my selling point. Hey, I'm sorry, I'm learning that for myself. But hey. And then just like the whole thing, like I'm my great grandmother, and here, and so it's like, hey, this is important, because I think like my history. So I'm gonna try it out, what it is. We,
Yeah, next one.
oh yeah, I'm Tina.
Yeah.
I'm next. All right, here we are. Does anybody know where this is? Okay. So in our language here, Onigimin is another word from Minnesota, Duluth. Neashi is like a point. So this is Park Point side, as you know it, or in English, Jagawami Kamiyashi is what we call it in the language. So, and that Neashi point, you kind of see that. And then we thought it was really important to add this map here. It's like, you know, our history, right? Our history is our stories, our traditions. We talk about the migration story and how we traveled here into this place where the food grows on water. There's all these stopping points. And for us, this is like one of the major stopping points. And it's super important. I mean, that's our home. So in this project, when we were introduced to it, it was like, you know, we didn't know much about it. I knew fairly little. I grew up on the West Coast too, and we have a lot of CMTs, culturally modified trees, a lot of field scars and old cedars out there. And so when I seen it, I was like, oh, I kind of know what that is, but I didn't think that they were here. I didn't know what they would look like in this area. And so when we were out and when we got introduced to Evan and the project, was like, here, this is right here. You see this? Do you see this tool mark? And I was like, that's a tool mark? That's a peel? Like by Ojibwe people? I had no idea. So it was really cool to learn that process of like, here's the peel, here's the healing, and here's like that intricate pattern of the peel mark when it's growing back. And then alongside of that, we learned about the fire scars. And so for me, like at first it was like a strange topic to wrap my head around fire scars, like because that fire history is so depressed and it's barely there, barely know much about it. And so like to be like, oh, there's fire scars that Anishinaabe people lit fires, and that's why those trees carry those scars. And I'm like, really? I didn't, you know what I mean? It just didn't stick in my mind right. And so it was just amazing to find so many of these on the point. Another thing that was really easy to like, not easy, I don't know how to say it. The trees are very resinous. So when we were finding these trees, when they get damaged, when they get scarred, when they get peeled, they carry this resin. This is kind of like one of the many tools of the Anishinaabe. You can use it as glue, use it as waterproof. It preserves the tree for the future. Super. So for that resin right here, this is one of the outcomes. These are the canoes that we would construct using that resin, that pitch. We would combine it with other elements. And I mean, look at that. Isn't that amazing?
Where's that?
Oh, this is that Fond du Lac. But I thought it was really important to show that, like this resin from these trees, like culturally relevant.
Where do you think that one was made?
Probably right outside. No. I think it was made right Fond du Lac. Was it? Oh, I didn't know that. I did not know that.
Good to know.
Good to know. So again, here's the point. We're going to talk about a little bit. This is where we found our samples. Evan and a team had kind of gone out before and just kind of like located a few samples, right? And like, here's their kind of areas where we found some fire scars. But what we're going to do is walk through the woods and find more. So that was fun. Does anybody see these beautiful raspberries? They are great for wiping. Need to go back. No, not really, but I think it was important people like the team. I remember we were out there and everybody's like, I remember walking through like raspberry bushes and like, is that poison ivy? Is that poison ivy? And I had to be like, no, this is what it looks like. And what I really like about this image is if you know plants. So this is poison ivy. Here's Julie. So yes, it's the medicine that hurts you and the medicine that heals you. They grow together. So it's that relationship, right? So here we start talking about our first sampling. Or I was talking about that tree stump and how it's super resinous and what we're getting into.
All right. Hopefully I don't repeat stuff that Evan and Melanie have already said a little bit about. But this is our first sample. Should be good.
You have to tell me when to go.
I'll tell you, I'll go finger guns.
Okay.
So those first, the two names, the points that she explained, we actually use those in our unique identifiers. So when we took our samples, we knew exactly which point they were coming from, and they each had their own number that actually was written on them afterwards. So the first thing we would do is when we go out into the forest, we would find a stump, and it's kind of funny. The first thing you do is kick it. So, like Val mentioned with the resin, that resin really holds that stump together. It could be down for decades, and because of this resin, it doesn't break down. However, if you have something like a white pine, it doesn't have that resin, so it breaks down relatively quickly. So if you kick it and it's not a red pine, it kind of explodes. I had so much rotting wood in my boots, but next one. Yeah, so here's us. Once we figured out like this is a red pine, we're gonna cut it. They're having so much fun. So much fun in the forest. Yeah. So we would take it. We would actually look at the outside of it because you can see the peels and some of the fire scars on the outsides. We'd say, yes, we know this is going to be a really good one. It's got something really prominent that we want to look at. Yeah, next one. So that's one that has some scar and some rotting, and we had taken it down. There's us cutting another one. That is pretty cool one. And they're kind of hidden. You can see they're kind of hidden in the underbrush there. So you really have to like split up, like Scooby-Doo style, like, and go off into different parts of the forest and like tell them, found one. So let's go to the next one. Yeah, so once we have those cut, some of them took a really long time to cut because that resin is very, very strong. There was one that it took like hours to cut. Is this the one? This is the one. It took us so long, like I'll say Val and Ashley, honestly.
I think it
was all four of us.
I would say they did like this so much, like right at the beginning, and then like I was like, I could take a try, like they make it look easy, and I was like, I'm done, like 3 like little cuts in, and I was like, I can't do it. I got noodles. Yeah. So once we have it cut, we would say, yes, we see a fire scar, we see a couple fires, we see a peel in there, and we would just kind of put little arrows into all of them. And on our little field notebook as well, we would say, here's the unique identifier, here's the approximate number of scars, number of peels. Sometimes if you had to take like one kind of higher up on a stump and one a little bit lower, you'd say like, we took 2 and these are the numbers on them. Yeah, so that was kind of just our cross sections. We did do one other really cool thing.
All right, so aside from finding the stumps and recognizing that they were fire scarred or culturally modified, we would also look for red pine surrounding area so that we could take the core samples in order to cross date and find out the age of that tree. So here we are taking diameter at breast height, finding out the size of the tree, living trees. Thank you. And here's Mocha and Emily taking some of those core samples. We'd also have to be careful not to hit a branch. You could always look up the tree and make sure you hit the right spot. go right straight to the cord. Make sure you get that pith there. And there's a nice specimen there, very beautiful. Emily did a very good job. Sample there. You can see the design there, we just off the pith, very center. Very close. Oh, here's our crew again. We're standing next to here. You can see there's another peel mark, that beautiful marbling kind of growth pattern that comes down. That's always a telltale sign. And then the beautiful Pringle can. That is where we stored all of our core samples that we placed into a straw and into the Pringle can. It's very, very high tech science. Oh, yes, and fun in the field. We always had fun. Who left this in here? I'm attempting to floss. She's trying to teach me. It didn't go well. Also, nice little break in the woods. And this is all of our samples that we had. We would like have a little cache, leave it on the side, go look for more, kind of fanning out, just walking through. And it was a lot to carry out.
Yeah.
The soft sand is not fun to walk on. Oh, yeah, of course. That was another hard one there. And the reindeer, yes, and tons of poison ivy everywhere. And this is when we got all of our samples back here. We had them all arranged throughout the room here. We had to let them dry out for about 3 weeks in order to go on to the next step. Oh, Pringle can, don't forget that. And this is when we made it to Duluth Makerspace. We were so blessed to be able to use this space. It's amazing in there. The amount of fun tools to work with. Tools. But we brought all the samples back there. We glued them down to boards, identified all the marks there, and then we got to work sanding them. Got to get that nice, beautiful. Here's a before and after here. You just sand it until it shines, and all of those rings pop up here, and you're able to see all of those stars and what you didn't see before. And here we are, hard at work, sanding away.
Being interviewed in between.
Oh, yes, we had the opportunity to have 2 different news crews there to interview us, and we're just sweating and sanding. Thank you. So I am so happy for those that did an interview, and I was not ready for that. And this beautifulness, I pass on to Nova.
So once we got our cores all sanded down, we were left with a very smooth, like trees surface. And once it was all smooth, we were able to see the rings very well underneath the microscope. So here you're able to see like the pith, and this is the center of the tree where everything else grows out of. You can see like right here is where a branch was. And this is like where we'd start counting the rings. So I believe this is where year 1 is. And from there, we're able to count each ring. We're able to get an approximate age of these trees. And the reason that we're able to do that is because I think you can go to the next picture. Go back. Okay. So the reason we can tell that these trees have aged a year is because of the climate where we are and the growing cycles that these trees go through. So they have a very productive growing season, usually. And then when colder weather strikes, they enter dormancy. And what you can see here is these darker parts of the rings is where the tree went dormant. So this is where it's growing, this is where it's dormant. And then if we were ever confused about the dormancy of the tree, you can zoom in very well with these microscopes, even down to like the cellular level. Like these are all individual cells of the tree. And the cell pattern gets a lot more condensed during the dormant season. You can tell when this tree has stopped growing every year just by looking at how condensed the cells are. Here is like a burn scar that we found in one of these tree samples. Sometimes it gets hard to date these because they often touch across like multiple years. But if you follow the tree, like the burn on to the end of if you follow the burn to its end, you can see like what year the burn happened at. Next. Okay. So in this one, this is easy to like trip you up with, but this one here is a false ring. So what happened here was the tree started to enter dormancy because the weather was bad, but it didn't fully enter dormancy. It didn't stay cold for very long. So it entered dormancy and came out. And that can be a problem if you don't know what to look out for, because it's very easy to get tripped up. But if you take a very close look at these, they're not as condensed during the dormancy period. So you can rule out the false rings. Okay. Here, to establish the age, it was all like manual counting. So we'd start at the pith and then draw a line out and count across that line as a reference point. So every 10 years, we mark an X. Every 50 years, we put 2 X's. And every 100 years, there would be 3 X's. Here are some core samples that were collected by the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources in 2010. And these were all taken from live trees. These are core samples. And cross-referencing these with the growth patterns on the stumps that we looked at can give us a very good indication of the exact date that these trees were. Because across all of these samples, the growth patterns are the same. If there's a bad year, you're going to see that across every single sample that you get. So it makes it very easy when you have a large data set to work with to narrow down to a specific date. It was a lot of looking through microscopes. My eyes started to get sore after a while. But it was really cool. This one was 102 years old when it died. Here we are, all hard at work.
So, I mean, should we just end it now? Or do you think you want to tell them? Or, well, would you like to know what they found? Okay.
Okay, so what you see here, all of those white lines are an individual tree's lifespan. And we're able to, after cross-referencing these with the data set from the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, we could line up these trees to how old they were, when they died, when they started growing. And we noticed some really cool patterns when we looked at these. So each of these red dots is a fire scar. And you'll notice that there are some fire scars that are reflected across almost the entire data set. There's a very prominent one that happened in 1804. There's a very prominent one that happened in 1842. And I forget the third one. 1829? 1829 was the third one. And what's stunning here is that as soon as the Treaty of 1854 was signed and Anishinaabe people were removed from Wisconsin Point and Minnesota Point, these fires stopped. There's a 100-year period where there were practically no fires at these points. And I wonder why that could be.
So the Anishinaabe left and then lightning stopped, right?
Oh, exactly. You also notice here, so those blue dots are peel scars. And you can tell that as these fires were happening, people were also utilizing these trees for to get pitch. And something that also sticks out here is that at Minnesota Point, there were a lot of fires. At Wisconsin Point, less so. And this is because like the Anishinaabeg resided at Wisconsin Point. You don't want to set a fire to your home, but you would set a fire to promote like blueberry growth and just food production in areas where you don't live. So at Minnesota Point, these fires were being set very regularly and rarely, if ever, happened at Wisconsin Point.
So. Correlation.
Oh, yeah. So these peel scars line up pretty neatly too with several different treaties that were signed by the Anishinaabeg. There is the Treaty of La Pointe, which was signed in 1842. And before this treaty was signed, there was a lot of peel marks on these trees. And we think that this is because, or that it may be because Chief Osagi and other people who lived at Wisconsin Point would make canoes with the pitch from these trees and use them to travel to sign these treaties. Same with 1854. Before the 1854 treaty, there were like a couple of peel scars that we think could be there for the same reason. Okay, and these core samples were all looked at by students at the Gida camp on the Fond du Lac Reservation by an Indigenous science camp.
They're gonna go retrieve special speakers.
So we're gonna hand the microphone over one more time if you're good.
Does anybody notice the transition in ages that's happening?
These are also mine too.
Scientists seem to be getting younger.
Who's you? My name is Ariana. My name is Blue. This is my name. Okay, so we were at Godot camp and we were like studying the course or like the core samples that like cut into the things. Yeah.
They got to check out this data set before I did. I was very jealous.
Yeah. We went home and grabbed it. We were using these like telescope things to like look at them and like count microscopes. Yeah, microscope to check the ages and like if there was like a drought or too much water or like all the other stuff they were talking about. We pretty much looked at. And we made like check or like not checks, like dots at each and every year. like 50 years, 100 years, centuries or decades, we did like dots for that.
And then we'd mark them down on a board and record our data. With the ages of the trees.
you find?
Hmm.
Do you
Didn't find.
So. Okay, well, the red pine was stopped growing because it needed the fires to grow. Because it grows off of soil with no weeds. So after fires, the red pine would start to grow. And that's after the sign of the treaty and after the fire stopped happening. So there's some more. And then there stopped being any.
There was one single
Yeah.
tree that regenerated
It did.
since then.
But after all those other different tree species, they grow after like there's more shade and like more leaves on the ground. So that's why you see more of like the birch and the aspen.
So that's good.
Yep. Those. Okay, well. The bar graph at the bottom of all the green lines was all of the trees that we recorded throughout the dates. And it was like how tall they were.
And so with this data set, the DNR shared a report that was used to help establish Minnesota Pine Forest State for Science and Natural Lit. And go ahead, Val. So this is the report. And I really appreciate them sharing. It's really interesting stuff, but there's a passage on page 2. Go ahead before. I wonder if you'd be willing to read this. You can start on like the third sentence. Yeah, go for it.
That's on third sentence. Okay. The uneven age nature of the red pine component of the stand, probably due to its presence on sand dunes, is unusual for a species that usually regenerates for a short time following fire. The fact that the stand is uneven age suggests the stand will require little management to maintain the pine components of the stand well into the future. Equally important is the fact that much of the pine stand has maintained its ecological integrity in spite of a long history of human disturbance described above.
And so I would like to point out that the DOS student data set directly addressed in many ways show how this conclusive statement is actually fundamental. And that's governing our understanding of this. And so the notion of uneven age means that you have continual regeneration through time. And did you see that?
No.
This is a court case, I would say. Thank you. 1996. And it was largely based because they looked at the diameter of the trees. And so that was awesome. We've got a few parts.
We're almost there.
Almost there. Okay, and so here's the story of this place, right? And Lane sent a photo of this incredible photograph that's held by the Trick family up in Ely, and a museum that's made out of 2 finished songs, which sounds amazing. And you know, it's interesting because you look at this and it's very much a glorification of extraction. You know, that's labeled as the largest pine raft in the world. So that's the North Shore, right? And if you zoom in, you can see piles of logs taller than buildings. You know, and it's a great way to celebrate that. But at the same time, what is particularly interesting that this photograph taken in the year 1902 also shows us another place. It shows us Minnesota Point. And it looks a lot different. And you know why. from the data sets the students all developed. That stand is not the same as it once was, and it doesn't have to stay the same. But there are processes that have been there forever that are now, or at least in recent ecological history. And so if you think about fire hazard, you know, this is the same thing happening again and again. Where we're at in this project, we started off talking about relationship. How many of you have read it? I believe it's required reading for all human beings. And she writes so beautifully about, you know, this blending of knowledge and these different ways of understanding. And she talks about relationship and reciprocity. And in her chapter about sweet gas, Wingashk, where when people tend to it, there's more, it's richer in abundance, and if you ignore it or overuse, it will go away. There's this reciprocity. Is it not the same? Is it not the same? These fire scars and these pines, are we not like in reciprocity? And so I want to share something with this perspective here. You remember what this is. It's been on several slides, and I'm going to overlay another layer, and we could do another think pair share, but it's already 8:30, so we'll just kind of move along at this point. And instead of thinking in pairing, just like, does anybody have an idea what that is? So to go back, the arrows are the general movement of the Anishinaabe from the Atlantic.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no.
Oh, wait, are you allowed to?
You can just go for it. This is the range of it. Wanagama. It's the same.
There's what?
It's the same. What is what? They are the same. The people and the pines and the people.
So the pines are in the same areas that the Anishinaabe have moved through and stopped at?
And carried the flame. So we've talked about Robin a lot because she's an incredible person. Wherever she goes, she drops these seeds of knowledge and these incredible ripples come out. And I had the incredible fortune of hosting her at University of Wisconsin-Platteville. Thank you, Miigwech. And in that day, we talked about a lot of things, and she was talking about she's working on how do you express the voice of plants in a way that honors the plants, but also as a way that people can understand it if you can't hear them directly. And I was thinking about leaves and the sound of air and leaves, and how every species carries their distinct kind of signature. It reflects this huge evolutionary history, and how pines create the fire regime that then perpetuates the pines with their needles. And I was driving across the drift, Lane was down, hanging out, we were looking at fire scar cross sections, talking about people fire pines, of all things. And I went for a haircut, and as I was driving across the drifts area, I fell into a dream kind of. And in my mind, this whole thing just like flooded out. And we've talked about it with some, and I'm gonna make a kick-ass children's book out of it. But driving across the drifts, and all of a sudden I could see this point of land, and there was a point of land that stretched out this way into a lake, and there were a big red pine on it. And right at the very point, there was this old bent grandmother pine tree. And she is curved over, twisted body, and had this deep fire scar right in her trunk. And I could see in the background there was a Anishinaabe grandma and her granddaughter, and they're walking through the woods coming to the point, and they're carrying baskets because underneath the pine was blueberries. It was beautiful. And they come in and they started picking, and I saw like the grandma's just kind of moving almost like a bear, you know, like picking as she goes. And granddaughter wasn't quite paying as much attention to the harvest, and so she tells her this beautiful story about how the Anishinaabe learned how to use fire to care for the land. And they finish their harvest. It's an honorable harvest. And as they begin to leave, the grandmother turns around and thanks, drops her same on, and she sets a fire. And that fire burns across the plain. And the trees are rejoicing because they know that now there's ground for their ancestors to take root. Their babies can finally take root. And the blueberries are rejoicing because they know that they will be enriched and reinvigorated through those things. And then the next summer, the blueberry moon is up and the trees are waiting, they're eager, they're excited for the people and to hear that story again, to see those names, but then the people didn't come back. What's a year in a tree? Right? And then the next year comes, and people don't come back. And the next, and the next, and the next. And it's trees, and it's preservation, and it's boarding school, and it's policy, and it's draconian fines, and it's an intentional suppressing this culture and engaging with this thing. And then the trees are waiting, the forest starts to change, it gets denser. And then they hear this boom, it's coming through, the trees are passing it on from one to the other to the other. It's there's people coming. Get ready with their seat. And then in the distance, I saw people come and they were wearing flannel and their hair soft. And everything. Except for the grandmother. Because that body of hers, it was so full of knowledge and understanding of history. It was so bent and twisted in the body of her. It wasn't worth it. Fire comes, but it's hot fire, it's too slash. And it scorches out, it burns out the roots, sowing blueberries, destroys the seed bank. And the forest starts to regrow, but it's different this time. It's asking. Voices are different, and plants are different, and all these beings are different. And my grandmother pine, that's her seed fill. And just drop on the forest born with it. And that is Jesus. And 100 years ago. And then all of a sudden, this young Anishinaabeg woman, she comes walking around with a thing. And she walks, pushing herself. And she's reading the story about how her people used to live there, but she wasn't hearing it from her grandma. That story had been destroyed. And she's walking on a stream like this, and she knows that it's important. And she gets it, she can feel that history that way. And as she's walking, this breeze comes through and it hits the branches of this grandmother pine. And listens to boughs, and a little fungal needles falls down, moving catches her up. And you see them catch right on the branches, this old withered berry bush. She looks down and she sees just a little dried berry. In that moment, all of a sudden, she washed over the memories of her grandmother. And very positive. She can actually offer them this beautiful place. Gentle peace. So this young woman feels the sadness, sweeps over her. And she's crying, she steps back, and she can feel the bark of this grandmother pine in the back. And she kneels down, she cries herself to sleep. And then she's in a dream. And in her dream, this wind starts to rise. She's on the planet, she stands up, and clouds come in, and it's boiling. Thunderbirds rolling on the top, it's rage on the walls, birds and drum. As a bolt of lightning comes out of the cloud and strikes this grandmother tree, and the bolt hits the tree, the body splits. This grandmother. This young woman, she turns to mourn passing of this tree, this ancient tree. And as she looks at the trunk, You can see. It's terrifying. It's fire. And she recognizes that that tree has been carrying the stories. And they're the stories of in his father. For years and years, over generations. So that those stories come. So when she wakes up, she drives it to this and she's going to this grandmother train, this family, and she offers back and gratitude for this knowledge and this understanding. And the best part in the dream, she takes out her later. So that gave me, I got to the place of getting haircut. You better write this down real quick. Wrote it down, I sit down in a chair and what were you writing? And so, as we wrap up, we start thinking about where it's.
Yeah, so as we mentioned earlier, there's been all this work going on. And we're starting to basically bring back the voice of fire, put it in people's faces and things like that. And this whole project simultaneously, while the scientific work is going on, all the studies and everything, my role is actually going out and gathering the indigenous knowledge, the memories about the fire, basically documenting all that so we can bring the science and the indigenous knowledge together to tell, again, the accurate history of the fire of this area and the importance to the Anishinaabe and the fact that the ecosystems here have been molded by fire and the lack of sense. And so I just want to acknowledge all of our other partners that are simultaneously doing all these efforts, such as, again, the folks that helped with Apostle Islands. We have Lane Johnson in the room who's taking a photo or a video right now. You want to stand up or give a thumbs up? We have Paul Priestley. And so he works with the Fond du Lac tribe with their fire program. David Honick, obviously that was here and did our own thing for us. He also works with them. And he's actually going out to do some prescribed burning in Oklahoma right now, I believe. And so we have like so much work going on and we're all collectively coming together. But the biggest thing I pointed out, we had our side commentary going to like get people thinking a little bit more, but we had the change in ages and our presenters and our scientists got younger and younger, and then we came to the story. So one goal with this is to basically bring the acceptance and the love and the connections to fire back to our younger generation. So our younger generation will be coming up doing these fires. They'll be raised not having that fear anymore. They'll be picking those tools back up, carrying our responsibilities. And it's a huge collective effort. So part of it is this is our closing words here, and we can stay for questions, whatever. But there's a so what, and there's a what can you do. So what is like, why are we doing this? Why does it even matter? Obviously, there's a cultural thing, and it matters to us as Anishinaabe people, our identity, our survival, and why does that matter? But the other part of it is, I don't know if there's anybody that lives on Minnesota Point. Yeah. So one thing that we've talked about, and Vern Northrup, if anybody knows him from Fond du Lac, he has a huge concern about this, is with the absence of fire on Minnesota Point, on Wisconsin Point, other areas. He's been doing wildland firefighting for years. And so he has talked about there's been so long of a period without any fire in those areas. If one were to happen now, it would be a bad one. We worry about losing those homes, the people there, the ecosystems that are currently present, wiping everything out. A big part of that issue, and Paul can speak to this, is response time. It would be extremely difficult and it would be a complete nightmare. And so part of the way to like combat that is to return fire. So to return fire to the lands is going to help the people of this area. And it's not just about the Anishinaabe, but it's everybody here and all of our collective responsibilities to help heal from this intergenerational trauma that we've all been a part of. but also to help protect into the future for our young ones. I mean, I think about, you know, I don't know like the history of your home or your family or anything like that, but I imagine in my mind, there's families out there that want to leave their homes to their kids, their grandkids, like they may not be there if these massive fires happen and we can't do anything about it. But if we start slowly introducing it with qualified badass people like Paul, that are the big fire engines, and they know how to do this work and they've been trained for so many years and we have so many specialists in the area. And so I just want to thank all those people that up to this point have been extremely supportive. And a lot of it and what you can do is just keep trying to become more educated. You know, ask us how you can help support us. If there's anything you can do with the project, you know, follow us as we move forward with efforts, get the children's book, read it to your grandkids, all those good things. But another big part of it is, and I'll say this in with good intentions, is those that have issues with it, if you can just kind of step aside and wait and stop and listen and trust. Because as we talked about tonight, Indigenous knowledge has been out there. We've known how to do this. We've known how to work with our ecosystems for all these years. Our Indigenous knowledge holds this. We've helped to form the areas where the pines are, where the Anishinaabeg are. And science is just now catching up to that and understanding that. So if you can kind of get out of that scientific mindset and trust the Indigenous knowledge and that things are going to be okay. And now is the time to do this work, basically. So time to return fire.
So Melanie is unavailable for questions. She's gonna have a brownie. But the students are happy to field any questions that you have. We have a microscope up here. Yes, this is live. There's also a microscope set up in the other room if you want to look at your sample yourself. Lane would love to offer up tours of the burns out at Cloquet. Anytime that anybody's interested to go see what a prescribed fire looks like on the ground, and I bet all of you want to join for that. Thank you so much for being here and sharing the story and such, and we really appreciate it. It's a really important conversation and all part of it. So be straightforward and have a wonderful night. You good? Share the story.
Take some moment if you didn't have the chance to. I really appreciate sharing that with you all. And also just wanted to say thank you briefly to Wisconsin-Platteville, who helped fund this work and also who co-hosts this River Talk series with us. Thank you.
You get the last slide. Also, we'll set out. Yeah, we'll set out some tobacco if you'd like to offer it in the fire on your way. So, but Colombian, you take one of these and certify, or just put it on your. Try it out. You take one.
Oh, that was so great. Oh, I heard a little bit of discussion before. Didn't go that well. Great.
We did a lot.
Yeah. Yeah,
We did like. But
it really works. The way you shifted between each other, just your presence and presence. Really, really exciting. Yeah, I can see why. It should be. Yeah, it's a great name.
I think we're gonna cross it there.
I think cross it there. Is that in April or where is it? Okay. They're doing another talk this week, I think. Yeah.
yeah,
It's so cool.
so we're really gonna have it all down there. It should be good.
Really proud of you. I mean, the way you take care of it, it's awesome.
Yeah.
It's a cool project.
Yeah. It's fun. Really like. Yeah.
So we're going to ask it. I wanted anything here, some of that, but it's on the table. Yeah.